Chapter 59 Oxygen Transport. Alveolar air does not have the same concentration of gases in the atmospheric air. There are several reasons for these differences. Firstly, the alveolar air is only partially replaced by atmospheric air with each breath. Second, oxygen is constantly being absorbed into the pulmonary blood from the alveolar air. Third, carbon dioxide is constantly diffusing from the pulmonary blood into the alveoli. And fourth, dry atmospheric air that enters the respiratory passages is humidified even before it reaches the alveoli. So that is why atmospheric air, it is composed of entirely nitrogen and oxygen. It normally contains no carbon dioxide and little water vapor. As soon as it enters the respiratory passages, it is exposed to the fluids that cover the respiratory surfaces. So that is why even before air enters the alveoli, it is totally humidified. Humidification of the air dilutes the O2 partial pressure at sea level from 159 to 149 in the humidified air and dilutes the nitrogen partial pressure from 597 to 563. Okay, you can remember this as 9 7s are 63. Okay, 5 and 5. Now, coming to the methods of oxygen transport, there are two principal methods from which oxygen is transported in the human body. It can combine with hemoglobin, and most of the O2 is transported in this form. The presence of hemoglobin in the RBCs allows the blood to transport 30 to 100 times as much as O2 that could be transported in the form of dissolved O2 in the water of the blood. Coming to O2 that is dissolved in the plasma, the total amount of O2 dissolved in the plasma, it obeys Henry's law and it is proportional to the partial pressure. However, the amount of O2 that can be transported in this form is very small and amounts to only 0.3 ml of O2 per 100 ml of blood, considering an arterial PO2 of 100 mm of Hg. 97% of oxygen transport occurs in combination with hemoglobin and only 3% occurs dissolved in the plasma. This is a point that you have to remember. Okay, now before we talk about transport of oxygen in the dissolved state, we need to talk about two things. One thing is this diagram right here. As blood flows through the blood capillaries that surround the alveoli, blood capillaries that flow through that are in contact with the alveoli, first there is venous blood, which is at 40 mm of HgPO2. Okay, as the blood traverses the first 1/3 of the capillary distance, in the first 1/3 itself, the major change in PO2 takes place. That is, the blood gets highly oxygenated. It reaches about 104 mm of Hg. In the next 2/3 of the distance, there is not much change in the PO2 that happens. Okay, so within 1/3, the first 1/3 of the distance itself, these pressure changes take place. Partial pressures of oxygen change. Okay, and the second thing is we need to talk about shunt, and that is a shunt or the venous admixture. See. The systemic venous blood, the PO2 is 40 mm of Hg. Okay, as it reaches the pulmonary capillaries, the PO2 it increases to 104. But into the left atrium, you also have not just the oxygenated blood from the lungs that enters, you also have venous admixture of blood, because some of the vessels from the bronchial circulation, 2% of the blood that it passes from the aorta through the bronchial circulation and it enters into the left atrium. Okay, this is at a PO2 of 40. So this venous admixture of bronchial circulation blood into the pulmonary capillaries, it causes a reduction of PO2 from 104 to 95. Okay, and this is the PO2 of blood in the systemic arterial blood, that is 95 mm of Hg, and finally it falls to PO2 of 40 in systemic capillaries again. Okay, so these are the two diagrams we need to discuss. Now coming back to the transport of oxygen in the dissolved state, at the normal arterial PO2 of 95 mm of Hg, about 0.3 or 0.29 ml of O2 is dissolved in every 100 ml of water in the blood. And when the PO2 of blood falls to the normal 40 mm of Hg in the tissue capillaries, only 0.12 ml of blood O2 remains dissolved. In other words, 0.17 ml of O2 is normally transported in the dissolved state to the tissues by each 100 ml of arterial blood flow. This compares with almost 5 ml of O2 that is transported by the RBC hemoglobin. Therefore, the amount of O2 transported to the tissues in dissolved state is normally slight, only about 3% of the total, as compared with 97% transported by the hemoglobin. Okay. And during strenuous exercise, when hemoglobin release of O2 to the tissues increases another threefold, the relative quantity of O2 transported in the dissolved state falls to as little as 1.5%. But if a person breathes O2 at a very high alveolar PO2 level, the amount transported in the dissolved state can become much greater, sometimes so much that a serious excess of O2 occurs in the tissues and oxygen poisoning ensues. This often leads to brain convulsions and even death. Okay, we'll discuss this later. Coming to the role of hemoglobin in oxygen transport, normally 97% of the oxygen transported from the lungs to the tissues is carried with chemical combination with hemoglobin in the RBCs. The remaining 3% is transported in the dissolved state of the plasma. Thus, under normal conditions, O2 is carried to the tissues almost entirely by hemoglobin. Okay, so now let's talk about reversible combination of oxygen with hemoglobin. The chemistry of hemoglobin, we've already studied it. It contains alpha chains, beta chains, gamma chains, and delta chains in various forms of hemoglobin. The most common form of hemoglobin in the adult human being is hemoglobin A, which is a combination of 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. In the newborn infant, we find hemoglobin F or fetal hemoglobin, and that is a predominant form of hemoglobin, which is usually replaced in the first year of life. See, there are 4 iron atoms in each hemoglobin molecule, because each hemoglobin chain has a heme prosthetic group that contains an Fe atom, and there are 4 globin chains in the hemoglobin molecule. So there are 4 iron atoms in each hemoglobin molecule. Each of these can bind loosely with 1 molecule of oxygen, making a total of 4 molecules of O2 that can be transported by each hemoglobin molecule. Okay, 4 molecules of O2 or 8 oxygen atoms, because the atomicity of oxygen is 2, number of atoms equals 2 into, that is atomicity into the number of molecules. Okay, so 2 into 4 is 8. The types of hemoglobin chains in the hemoglobin molecule determine the binding affinity of the hemoglobin for O2, where it was pointed out that the O2 molecule combines loosely and reversibly with the heme portion of hemoglobin. When PO2 is high, as in the pulmonary capillaries, O2 binds with the hemoglobin, but when PO2 is low, as in the tissue capillaries, O2 is released from the hemoglobin. This is the basis for almost all oxygen transport from the lungs to the tissues. Now let's talk about the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So here you can see the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, which demonstrates a progressive increase in the percentage of hemoglobin bound with O2 as the blood PO2 increases, which is called the percent saturation of hemoglobin. So because the blood leaving the lungs and entering the systemic arteries usually has a PO2 of 95 mm of Hg, one can see from the dissociation curve that the usual O2 saturation of systemic arterial blood averages 97%. Okay. Conversely, in normal venous blood returning from the, at 95, the percent saturation is 97. And conversely, in normal venous blood returning from the peripheral tissues, PO2 is about 40 mm of Hg, and the saturation of hemoglobin averages 75%. Okay. Coming to the maximum amount of oxygen that can combine with the hemoglobin of the blood of a normal person contains about 15 grams of hemoglobin in each 100 ml of blood, and each gram of hemoglobin can bind with a maximum of 1.34 ml of O2, and that is 1.39 ml when the hemoglobin is chemically pure, but impurities such as methemoglobin, they reduce this. Therefore, 15 into 1.34 equals 20.1, which means that on average, the 15 grams of hemoglobin in the 100 ml of blood can combine with a total of about 20 ml of O2 if the hemoglobin is 100% saturated. This is usually expressed as 20 volume percent. The oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve for the normal person can also be expressed in terms of volume percent of O2. Okay, as shown here on the right side. Now, amount of oxygen released from the hemoglobin when systemic arterial blood flows through the tissues. When we talk about this, the total quantity of oxygen bound with hemoglobin in normal systemic arterial blood, which is 97% saturated, is about 19.4 ml per 100 ml of blood. On passing through the tissue capillaries, this amount is reduced on average to 14.4 ml. Okay, so thus under normal conditions, about 5 ml of O2 is transported from the lungs to the tissues by each 100 ml of blood flow. This you need to remember, it is 5 ml of O2 that is transported by 100 ml of blood, and 4 ml of CO2 that is transported by 100 ml of blood. Transport of oxygen is markedly increased during strenuous exercise. During heavy exercise, the muscle cells use oxygen at a rapid rate, which in extreme cases can cause the muscle interstitial fluid PO2 to fall from normal 40 to as low as 15. At this low pressure, only 4.4 ml of O2 remains bound with the hemoglobin in each 100 ml of blood. So that is why you can see here. Okay. So that is why 19.4 minus 14.4.4 or 15 ml is a quantity of O2 actually delivered to the tissues by each 100 ml of blood flow, meaning that 3 times as much O2 as normal is delivered in each volume of blood that passes through the tissues. Okay. And coming to the hemoglobin and how it buffers tissue PO2, although hemoglobin is necessary for the transportation of oxygen to the tissues, it performs another function essential to life. It functions as a tissue oxygen buffer system. That is, the hemoglobin in the blood is mainly responsible for stabilizing the PO2 in the tissues. This can be explained as follows. Hemoglobin helps maintain nearly constant PO2 in the tissues. See, under basal conditions, the tissues require about 5 ml of O2 from each 100 ml of blood passing through the tissue capillaries. Okay. For the normal 5 ml of O2 to be released per 100 ml of blood flow, the PO2 must fall to about 40 mm of Hg. Okay, if the PO2 at the tissue level falls, then PO2 from the arterial blood, that is 95, can go to 40. Okay. Therefore, the tissue PO2 normally cannot rise above this level of 40, because if it did, the amount of oxygen needed by the tissues would not be released from the hemoglobin. In this way, the hemoglobin normally sets an upper limit on the PO2 in the tissues at about 40 mm of Hg. Conversely, during heavy exercise, extra amounts of oxygen must be delivered from the hemoglobin to the tissues. However, this delivery of extra oxygen can be achieved with little further decrease in tissue PO2 because of the steep slope of the dissociation curve and the increase in the tissue blood flow caused by the decreased PO2, that is a very small fall in PO2 causes large amounts of extra oxygen to be released from the hemoglobin. Okay. During strenuous exercise, a person's body may require as much as 20 times the normal amount of oxygen. Also, because of increased cardiac output during exercise, the time the blood remains in the pulmonary capillary may be reduced to less than 1/2 of the normal. Yet, because of the great safety factor for diffusion of oxygen through the pulmonary membrane, the blood still becomes saturated with O2 by the time it leaves the pulmonary capillaries. This can be explained as follows. First, we know that the diffusion capacity for O2 increases almost threefold during exercise. This results mainly from increased surface area of capillaries participating in diffusion and also for a more nearly ideal ventilation-perfusion ratio in the upper part of the lungs. Second, we need to note that under non-exercising conditions, the blood becomes almost saturated with O2 by the time it has passed through 1/3 of the pulmonary capillary, and little additional oxygen normally enters the blood during the latter 2/3 of its transit. That is, the blood normally stays in the lung capillaries about 3 times as long as needed to cause full oxygenation. So that is why during exercise, even with a shortened time of exposure in the capillaries, the blood can still become fully oxygenated. So when atmospheric oxygen concentration changes markedly, the buffer effect of hemoglobin still maintains almost constant tissue PO2. We need to understand one thing, that tissue PO2 at 40 remains almost constant during all conditions. The normal PO2 in the alveoli is about 104 mm of Hg, but as one ascends a mountain or ascends in an airplane, the PO2 can easily fall to less than half this amount. Alternatively, when one enters areas of compressed air, such as deep in the sea or in pressurized chambers, the PO2 may rise to 10 times this level. Even so, the tissue PO2 changes little. It can be seen from the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve here that when alveolar PO2 is decreased to as low as 60 mm of Hg, okay, the percentage hemoglobin saturation is still 89%, okay, and this is just only 8% below the normal saturation of 97%. Further, the tissues still remove about 5 ml of O2 from each 100 ml of blood passing through the tissues. In order to remove this O2, the PO2 of venous blood falls to 35 from 40. That is only 5 mm of Hg below the normal value of 40. Thus, the tissue PO2 hardly changes despite the marked fall in alveolar PO2 from 104 to 60. Conversely, when the alveolar PO2 rises as high as 500 mm of Hg, the maximum O2 saturation of hemoglobin can never rise above 100%, which is only 3% above the normal level of 97%. Consequently, the level of alveolar PO2 may vary greatly from 60 to more than 500 mm of Hg PO2. And still, the PO2 in the peripheral tissues does not vary more than a few ml from normal, demonstrating beautifully the tissue oxygen buffer function of the blood hemoglobin system. And now coming to factors that shift the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve and their importance for oxygen transport. See, several factors can displace this curve to the right or to the left. Okay, we need to learn certain basic things. My trick to remember them is, when there is an increase in PO2 and pH, this happens at the lung level, and this is a left shift that happens at the lung level. Okay, whereas coming to the right shift, it means that oxygen is being unloaded at the tissue level. PO2 and pH decrease, rest all increase. Okay, this is how I remember it. So this figure shows that when the blood becomes slightly acidic, when pH decreases, okay, and then there is right shift, about 15% to the right. Conversely, an increase in pH shifts the curve a similar amount to the left. In addition to pH changes, there are several other factors that are known to shift the curve, okay, such as 2,3 BPG and increase blood temperature and increase CO2 concentration. PO2 you can write it as H plus, sorry, pH you can write it as H plus. So if pH decreases, that means H plus is increasing. So these two, when they decrease, rest all increase, it causes right shift, okay? And converse. Coming to the Bohr effect, it refers to the increased delivery of oxygen to the tissues when CO2 and hydrogen ions shift the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. A shift of the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right in response to increases in blood CO2 and hydrogen ions has a significant effect by enhancing the release of O2 from the blood in the tissues and enhancing oxygenation of blood in the lungs. This is called the Bohr effect. As the blood passes through the tissues, CO2 diffuses from the tissue cells into the blood. This diffusion increases the blood PO2, which in turn raises the blood carbonic acid and the hydrogen ion concentration. These effects shift the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation to the right and force the O2 away from the hemoglobin and therefore delivering increased amount of O2 to the tissues. Exactly the opposite effects occur in the lungs, where CO2 diffuses from the blood into the alveoli. This reduces the blood PO2 and decreases the hydrogen ion concentration, shifting the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left and upward. Therefore, the quantity of O2 that binds to the hemoglobin at any particular alveolar PO2 level becomes considerably increased, allowing greater O2 transport to the tissues. Coming to the effect of BPG, BPG-C, it is not PO2, it is not pH. So if it increases, then it causes right shift. The normal 2,3 biphosphoglycerate in the blood, it keeps the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve slightly shifted to the right at all time. In hypoxic conditions that last longer than a few hours, the quantity of BPG in the blood increases considerably, thus shifting the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve even farther to the right. This causes O2 to be released to the tissues at as much as 10 mm of Hg higher than the tissue pressure than would be the case without this increased BPG. See, in hypoxia, your tissues are not getting enough oxygen. So what happens is, in hypoxia, quantity of BPG increases and this shifts O2 hemoglobin curve to the right, which means there is unloading of oxygen which is available to the tissues, okay? So under some conditions, the BPG mechanism can be important for adaptation to hypoxia, especially to hypoxia caused by poor tissue blood flow or stagnant hypoxia. Coming to the rightward shift of the dissociation curve during exercise. During exercise, several factors shift the dissociation curve to the right, thus delivering extra amounts of O2 to the active exercising muscle fibers. The exercising muscles in turn release large quantities of CO2. This and several other acids released by the muscles increase the hydrogen ion concentration in the muscle capillary blood. Muscles, they release several acids. In anaerobic glycolysis, they release lactic acid and all that. So acids means H plus concentration is increasing. That means pH is decreasing, and then it means that there is right shift, okay? And in addition, the temperature of the muscle also rises 2 to 3 degrees, which can increase oxygen delivery to the muscle fibers even more. All these factors act together to shift the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve of the muscle capillary blood considerably to the right. And this rightward shift of the curve forces O2 to be released from the blood hemoglobin to the muscle at PO2 levels as high as 40 mm of Hg, even when 70% of the O2 has already been removed from the hemoglobin. Then in the lungs, the shift occurs in the opposite direction, allowing extra pickup of extra amounts of O2 from the alveoli. Coming to hypoxia and oxygen therapy, we know that whenever there is less oxygen available to the tissues, it is hypoxia. And sometimes O2 therapy is of great value, and other times it is of moderate value, and still at other times it is almost of no value. See, first we need to understand hypoxia. Hypoxia, we know the definition, decreased amounts of O2 are available to the tissues. What could be the causes, okay? See, the first cause could be that you are at a place where the atmospheric PO2 itself is low, that is, you are at high altitude, or if you are hypoventilating due to some reason, or if there is any ventilation perfusion mismatch, or if there is a venous to arterial shunt or a right to left shunt, okay, which causes less oxygen, okay, to be present in the blood. This is called hypoxic hypoxia. Coming to the next cause, there could be decreased oxygen carrying capacity of the blood because of any abnormality in the hemoglobin, anemia where there is reduced hemoglobin, or because of poisoning by carbon monoxide, in which due to higher affinity, hemoglobin molecules combine with carbon monoxide and do not combine with oxygen and thus do not carry the oxygen. This is called anemic hypoxia. Coming to the next cause, we have like the blood, instead of flowing to the tissues, it might remain stagnant, due to which oxygen does not flow along with the blood to the tissues. This is called stagnant hypoxia. This you can find in general circulatory deficiency or any shocks, or localized circulatory deficiency such as in peripheral, cerebral and coronary vessels and tissue edema, something like that. Also in whenever there is a thrombus that forms. And also finally, when the cellular mechanisms of the tissues cannot use oxygen due to some defect in the underlying metabolism, that is called histotoxic hypoxia. The tissues themselves cannot utilize oxygen. So this could be due to cyanide poisoning in most common cases. There is poisoning of cellular oxidation enzymes. In cyanide poisoning, the cytochrome oxidase system is poisoned, or there is diminished cellular metabolic capacity for using oxygen because of toxicity, vitamin deficiency or other factors. Okay, so this is all about the classification of hypoxia and most of its causes. Okay, these are the causes again. I've discussed all of them. And coming to inadequate tissue capability to use oxygen, the classic cause of inability to the tissues to use O2 is cyanide poisoning, in which the action of the enzyme cytochrome oxidase is completely blocked by the cyanide to such an extent that tissues simply cannot use oxygen even when plenty is available. Also, deficiencies of some of the tissue cellular oxidative enzymes of other elements in the tissue oxidative system lead to this type of hypoxia. Special example occurs in the disease beriberi, vitamin B1 deficiency, in which several important steps in tissue utilization of O2 and formation of CO2 are compromised because of vitamin B deficiency. Coming to the effects of hypoxia on the body, hypoxia, if severe enough, can cause death of cells throughout the body, but in less severe degrees, it causes principally decreased mental activity or depressed mental activity, sometimes culminating in coma, and reduced work capacity of the muscles. Okay, coming to the effect of oxygen therapy in different types of hypoxia. See, oxygen can be administered by placing the patient's head in a tent that contains air fortified with oxygen, or allowing the patient to breathe either pure O2 or high concentrations of O2 from a mask, or administering oxygen through an intranasal tube. Okay, recalling we can easily decide when O2 therapy will be of value and how valuable. See, O2 therapy is of value in anemic hypoxia and hypoxic hypoxia. Okay, but in stagnant hypoxia, it is of little value, and it is of O2 therapy is of very high value in hypoxic hypoxia. It is of considerably lesser value in anemic and stagnant hypoxia, and it is of no value in histotoxic hypoxia. So in atmospheric hypoxia, O2 therapy can completely correct the depressed O2 level in the inspired gases and therefore provide 100% effective therapy. In hypoventilation hypoxia, a person breathing 100% O2 can move 5 times as much oxygen into the alveoli with each breath as when breathing normal air. Therefore, here again, O2 therapy can be extremely beneficial. However, this provides no benefit for the excess blood CO2 also caused by the hypoventilation. In hypoxia caused by impaired alveolar membrane diffusion, essentially the same result occurs as in hypoventilation hypoxia, because O2 therapy can increase the PO2 in the lung alveoli from the normal value of about 100 to as high as 600. This raises the pressure gradient. And this highly beneficial effect of O2 therapy in diffusion hypoxia is demonstrated in this figure, which shows that the pulmonary blood in this patient with pulmonary edema picks up oxygen 3 to 4 times as rapidly as would occur with no therapy. Okay, in hypoxia caused by anemia, the abnormal hemoglobin transport of oxygen, circulatory deficiency or physiological shunt, oxygen therapy is of much less value because normal O2 is already available in the alveoli. The problem instead is that one or more of the mechanisms for transporting oxygen from the lungs to the tissues are deficient. Even so, a small amount of extra oxygen between 7 to 30% can be transported in the dissolved state in the blood when alveolar O2 is increased to maximum, even though the amount transported by the hemoglobin is hardly altered. This small amount of extra oxygen may be the difference between life and death. In the different types of hypoxia caused by inadequate tissue use of O2, there is abnormality neither of the O2 pickup by the lungs nor of the transport to the tissues. Instead, the tissue metabolic enzyme system is simply incapable of using the oxygen that is delivered. Therefore, O2 therapy provides no measurable benefit in histotoxic hypoxia.